The moon was a cold, gray rock floating in the endless blackness of space. It wasn't much to look at, just another barren chunk of dirt and dust on the edge of human territory. But for Alex Carter, it was home, or at least as close to home as he'd get out here. He had been stationed on this lonely outpost for nearly 2 years, working as an engineer tasked with maintaining the aging communications array that sat like a rusty sentinel on the surface. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough, and Alex liked the quiet. Today, though, something felt different. As Alex ran his usual diagnostics on the equipment, the screen flickered unexpectedly. At first, he thought it might be interference from solar flares, or maybe just another glitch in the outdated system. But then he noticed something strange. Faint signal coming through, weak but steady. It wasn't anything familiar, not one of the standard frequencies used by Earthships or colonies. This was something else entirely. Curious, Alex leaned closer to the monitor, his fingers tapping commands into the keyboard. The signal was scrambled, almost indecipherable, but after some tweaking, fragments began to emerge. Strange patterns. Unfamiliar tones. It sounded alien. His heart raced. Alien signals weren't unheard of, but they were rare enough to make anyone's pulse quicken. Alex grabbed his tablet and headed straight for the science lab, where Dr. Lavra Hayes spent most of her time studying languages not human ones, but those spoken by other species scattered across the galaxy. When Alex burst into the lab, Lavra looked up from her work, surprised by the interruption. She was younger than most senior scientists, barely in her 30s, but she had already earned a reputation for being brilliant. Her dark hair was tied back in a loose bun, and her glasses perched precariously on the tip of her nose. "What is it?" she asked, setting down her stylus. "I think you need to hear this," Alex said breathlessly, holding up the tablet. He replayed the signal, watching Laura's expression shift from curiosity to shock. This isn't random noise," she murmured, adjusting her glasses. "It's structured. It has meaning." She immediately got to work, pulling up software designed to analyze unknown languages. Hours passed as the two worked side by side, piecing together bits of the message. Slowly, words began to take shape, fragmented phrases that hinted at urgency. Desperation. Finally, Lava let out a gasp. "It's a distress call." Alex stared at her. "You're sure?" She nodded, pointing to the translation on the screen. "It says something about an attack. Their world is under siege. They're asking for help." "Who's asking?" Alex asked. Lavra hesitated. "They call themselves the Valens. I've never heard of them before." Word spread quickly through the small outpost. Within hours, everyone knew about the mysterious signal. Speculation ran wild. Some thought it was a hoax, others believed it could be a trap set by hostile aliens. But Captain Daniel Blake, commander of the starship Eclipse, didn't have the luxury of dismissing it outright. When High Command contacted him later that day, the orders were clear: investigate the source of the signal. Blake wasn't thrilled about the mission. He'd seen too many rescue operations turn into disasters. Still, he couldn't ignore the possibility that real lives were at stake. If the Valens were telling the truth, refusing to act could damage humanity's standing in the galaxy. And if they weren't, well, he'd deal with that when the time came. The Eclipse was a mid-sized vessel, not the largest or most advanced ship in the fleet, but reliable. Its crew consisted of seasoned professionals who had been through their share of tough missions. Among them was Mia Reynolds, the ship's pilot. With sharp reflexes and nerves of steel, she was known for getting people out of tight spots. Then there was Ryan Cole, the tactical officer. A no-nonsense guy with a knack for strategy. Ryan always preferred caution over heroics. As preparations for departure got underway, tension simmered among the crew. Mia voiced her concerns during a briefing in the mess hall. "We don't even know what we're walking into," she said, leaning back in her chair. "For all we know, this could be a setup." Ryan nodded in agreement. "Exactly. These so-called Valens might be using us to fight their battles. Why should we risk our necks for strangers?" Dr. Lavra Hayes, who had joined the mission to assist with communication efforts, spoke up. "Because it's the right thing to do," she said firmly. "If we turn a blind eye every time someone cries for help, What does that say about us? Besides, imagine what we could learn from them. Their technology, their culture, it's an opportunity. Blake listened to the debate without saying much. When the room fell silent, he stood up. "Here's the bottom line," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "We're going. That's not negotiable. But we go smart. We gather intel, assess the situation, and decide our next move based on facts, not assumptions. Understood?" The crew nodded reluctantly. Orders were orders. After all, the journey to the coordinates provided in the distress signal took weeks. Hyperspace travel wasn't exactly comfortable, and the cramped quarters of the Eclipse only added to the stress. During the long hours, conversations often returned to the same question: what would they find when they arrived? Finally, the ship dropped out of hyperspace near a distant star system. On the view screen, a planet loomed large, lush, and green, with swirling clouds and shimmering oceans. It was beautiful, unlike any world Alex had ever seen. But there were signs of trouble, too. Scorch marks scarred the surface, and plumes of smoke rose from several areas. The sight sent a chill down everyone's spine. As the eclipse approached, sensors detected movement in orbit. Alien ships, sleek and angular, patrolled the skies. They weren't friendly. Weapons powered up automatically as the crew braced for potential conflict. Then, out of nowhere, a new signal came through. This time, it was clearer, more direct. A voice, deep and resonant, filled the bridge. Through Laura's translations, they learned it belonged to Zinara, leader of the Valens. Her tone was desperate yet dignified as she explained their plight. The Kragath, a brutal race bent on domination, had invaded their world. They sought to drain its core energy, leaving the planet lifeless. Zinara pleaded for humanity's aid, promising access to advanced technology in return. The offer sparked mixed reactions among the crew. Some saw it as a chance to gain powerful allies. Others viewed it as a dangerous gamble. For now, though, Blake kept his focus on one thing: finding the truth. With careful maneuvering, the Eclipse entered the planet's atmosphere and landed in a secluded area. The moment the ramp lowered, the crew stepped onto foreign soil for the first time. The air smelled sweet, tinged with floral notes, and the ground beneath their boots felt soft, almost spongy. In the distance, towering trees swayed gently in the breeze, but beauty couldn't mask the devastation. Craters pockmarked the landscape, remnants of relentless bombardment. Charred ruins marked what had once been thriving cities. Survivors emerged cautiously from hiding places, their insectoid forms both fascinating and unsettling. Bioluminescent markings glowed faintly on their exoskeletons, shifting colors with emotion. Zinara herself greeted them personally, her presence commanding respect. Despite her obvious weariness, she thanked them for coming, explaining that the Kragath had already enslaved countless worlds. Without intervention, Vela Prime would be next. Standing amidst the ruins, Blake realized the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about helping strangers, it was about deciding what kind of future humanity wanted to build in the stars. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: the choices they made here would echo far beyond this battered planet. End document. The Eclipse hovered silently above the scarred surface of Vela Prime, its crew trying to make sense of the devastation below. The planet was breathtakingly beautiful, with vast forests stretching as far as the eye could see and rivers that shimmered like liquid silver under the twin suns. But beauty couldn't hide the wounds inflicted upon it. Craters marred the landscape, smoke billowed from burning cities, and the air carried a faint metallic tang that hinted at destruction. Captain Daniel Blake stood on the bridge, staring at the view screen. His mind raced with questions. How much of what Zinara had said was true? Were the Kragath really as ruthless as she claimed? And most importantly, could humanity afford to get involved in a conflict this massive? He glanced at his crew: Mia Reynolds, Ryan Cole, Dr. Lavra Hez, and Alex Carter, all waiting for his next move. They trusted him to lead, but even he wasn't sure what the right decision was. "We need more information," Blake finally said, breaking the silence. "I want a team on the ground. We'll meet these Valens face to face and see the situation." For ourselves, Mia raised an eyebrow. You're sending us down there, into enemy territory? Blake nodded. Not deep enough to draw attention, but close enough to gather intel. If we're going to help or decide not to, we need facts, not guesses. The scouting party consisted of Blake, Mia, and Lava. Alex stayed behind to monitor communications from the ship, while Ryan coordinated defenses in case things went south. As the shuttle descended through the atmosphere, the trio braced themselves for whatever awaited them on the surface. When they landed, the first thing they noticed was the smell, a mix of burnt vegetation and something sharp, almost chemical. The second thing was the eerie quiet. There were no birdsong, no rustling leaves, no signs of life except for a few distant figures scurrying between trees. The Valens had arranged a meeting point near one of their surviving settlements. A cluster of domed structures partially hidden by dense foliage. Zinara greeted them personally. She was taller than any human, her exoskeleton gleaming faintly in shades of gold and green. Her bioluminescent markings pulsed softly, shifting colors as she spoke. Through Laura's translations, she explained the full extent of the Kragath invasion. The invaders had arrived months ago, demanding access to the planet's core energy, a resource vital to both the Valens' survival and their technology. When the Valens refused, the Kragath attacked without mercy. They destroy everything. Zinara said, her voice heavy with sorrow. Our homes, our crops, our people, nothing is spared. They leave only enough alive to serve them. Blake's jaw tightened. Why haven't you fought back? Zinara hesitated before answering. We tried. But the Kragath are stronger, better armed. Their weapons are unlike anything we've ever seen. Many of our warriors have fallen. Those who remain are scattered, hiding in caves and ruins. Lavra stepped forward, her expression earnest. There must be something we can do, some way to turn the tide. Zinara's glowing markings flared briefly, signaling hope. If your kind is willing to stand with us, perhaps we can reclaim what has been lost. But time is running out. Buh. Kragath grow bolder each day. Blake exchanged a glance with Mia, who gave him a slight nod. Despite her earlier reservations, she seemed to understand the stakes now. Take us to your people, Blake told Zinara. Let us see what we're dealing with. Under Zinara's guidance, the group traveled deeper into the forest. Along the way, they passed scenes of unimaginable horror. Entire villages lay in ruins, their inhabitants either dead or taken captive. In one clearing, they found makeshift graves marked by simple stones. Lavra knelt beside one, tracing the carvings etched into the surface. These symbols, they tell stories, she murmured. Each grave marks not just a life lost, but a legacy destroyed. As they continued, they encountered survivors hiding in underground bunkers carved into the hillsides. Families huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. Children clung to their parents, too frightened to speak. One elder approached Blake, his exoskeleton cracked and faded with age. Through Lavar, he begged for help, offering whatever resources they had left. It was clear that the Valens were desperate, not just for weapons or reinforcements, but for hope itself. By nightfall, the team reached a larger bunker serving as a temporary command center. Inside, Jacob Holt awaited them. A grizzled ex-soldier with a weathered face and a limp, Jacob had lived among the Valens for years after deserting Earth's military during a particularly brutal campaign. He'd grown to respect their culture and now fought alongside them against the Kragath. Captain Blake. Jacob greeted him, his tone gruff but respectful. Didn't expect to see humans out here, especially not ones looking to play hero. Blake ignored the jab. What can you tell us about the Kragath? Jacob gestured for them to follow him to a crude map spread across a table. Using sticks and stones, he outlined the invaders' movements. They hit hard and fast, targeting key locations, first power grids, water supplies, anything that keeps your enemies alive. Once they've crippled you, they move in for the kill. Right now, they're focusing on the capital city. That's where their main force is stationed, and their leaders. Blake asked. Jacob tapped a spot on the map. Here, at the central spire, that's where they're extracting the core energy. If you want to stop them, that's where you'll need to strike. Blake studied the map carefully, his mind working through the possibilities. Attacking the spire head-on would be suicide, but maybe there was another way. He turned to Lavra. "Can you decode those symbols we saw earlier? The ones on the graves?" She nodded. "I think so." "Why?" "They might hold clues about the Kragath's weaknesses, or at least give us insight into how the Valens used to fight back." While Lavra worked on deciphering the texts, Blake and Mia explored the bunker further. They met resistance fighters preparing for battle, sharpening crude weapons and practicing hand-to-hand combat. Morale was low, but determination burned brightly in their eyes. One young fighter, barely old enough to hold a weapon, approached Mia shyly. "You're from Earth, right?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Is it true you came all this way?" "To help us?" Mia crouched down to meet his gaze. "Yeah, kid." "That's why we're here," the boy smiled weakly. "Thank you." Back at the command center, Lavra called Blake over excitedly. "I found something," she said, holding up her tablet. On the screen was a translation of the symbols, a warning about the dangers of misusing core energy, along with instructions for creating devices capable of disrupting it. "This could be huge," Blake said, his voice rising with excitement. "If we can replicate these designs, we might have a chance against the Kragath." Jacob frowned. "Even if you build them, you'll still need numbers. The Kragath aren't going to fall for some half-baked ambush," Blake nodded. "Then we'll give them more than they bargained for." Over the next few days, plans began to take shape. With Jacob's help, Blake organized the scattered resistance fighters into a cohesive unit. Training sessions focused on guerrilla tactics, how to strike quickly and retreat before the enemy could retaliate. Meanwhile, Alex worked tirelessly aboard the Eclipse, retrofitting salvaged parts to create prototypes based on Laura's findings. Tensions ran high as preparations neared completion. Everyone knew the upcoming battle would determine the fate of Vela Prime and possibly humanity's place in the galaxy. Blake gathered his team for one final briefing. "We're outnumbered, outgunned, and probably outmatched," he admitted. "But we have something the Kragath don't: courage. And if we play our cards right, we might just pull this off." Mia smirked. "Or we'll die trying," Blake didn't argue. Deep down, he knew the risks. But as he looked around at his crew, at the Valens who had placed their trust in him, he felt a spark of resolve. Failure wasn't an option, not here. Not now. The stage was set. All that remained was to execute the plan and pray it was enough, and document. The morning of the scouting mission dawned gray and damp, with a thick mist clinging to the forest floor. Captain Daniel Blake led his small Timia Reynolds, Lavra Hayes, and Jacob Holt through the dense underbrush, their footsteps muffled by the soft soil. The air was heavy with tension, each step bringing them closer to enemy territory. They had one goal: gather intelligence on the Kragath's movements and assess their defenses firsthand. Jacob moved ahead, his years of living among the Valens making him an expert at navigating this terrain. He signaled for the group to stop. When they reached a ridge overlooking a wide valley, below, the Kragath were hard at work. Massive machines churned up the earth, digging trenches and setting up fortifications. Alien soldiers patrolled the area, their hulking forms clad in dark armor that gleamed faintly even in the dim light. Their weapons looked like nothing Blake had ever seen, bulky but deadly, designed for maximum destruction. "They're building a perimeter," Jacob whispered, crouching low behind a fallen tree. "Looks like they're expecting trouble." Blake nodded, his eyes scanning the scene. "Good, let's hope we can give it to them." Lavra adjusted her glasses, squinting as she tried to make sense of the alien activity. "Do you see those towers?" she asked, pointing to several tall structures rising from the ground. "They look like energy collectors. Maybe they're using them to siphon power from the planet's core." "That's bad news for the Valens," Mia muttered. "If the Kragath drained too much energy, it could destabilize the entire ecosystem." Blake frowned. "We need to find out more about those towers. If we can disable them, we might buy ourselves some time." Before anyone could respond, a sharp crack echoed through the trees. Everyone froze. A moment later, a Kragath patrol emerged. from the mist, trudging noisily along a nearby trail. There were 4 of them, armed to the teeth and clearly not expecting resistance. Blake motioned for his team to stay low and quiet, but luck wasn't on their side. One of the aliens paused, its reptilian head tilting as if sensing something. Miss, stay down," Blake hissed under his breath. Thought it was too late. The Kragath raised its weapon, letting out a guttural roar that sent chills down everyone's spines. The patrol scattered, fanning out to search the area. Blake cursed silently. They'd been spotted? "Time to move," he said, gripping his. "Rifle tightly. Mia, cover us. Lavra, stick close." The team sprang into action. Mia fired a burst of shots to draw the Kragath's attention, her aim precise despite the chaos. 2 of the aliens turned toward her position, giving Blake and the others a chance to slip away. Jacob took point, leading them deeper into the forest. While Lavra stumbled along behind him, clutching her tablet like a lifeline, but the Kragath weren't easily fooled. Heavy footsteps pounded the ground as they gave chase, their weapons firing indiscriminately. Trees exploded into splinters around the fleeing humans, forcing them to zigzag wildly to avoid getting hit. Blake glanced over his shoulder, his heart pounding. They couldn't keep running forever. We need to lose them. He shouted, "There!" Jacob yelled, pointing to a narrow ravine ahead. "Jump in there!" Without hesitation, the group leaped into the ravine, landing hard on the rocky bottom. Above them, the Kragath roared in frustration, unable to follow without exposing themselves to counterattack. For now, they were safe, but only temporarily. Back aboard the Eclipse, Alex Carter monitored the situation anxiously. When the distress signal came through, he wasted no time patching it into the ship's mainframe. "Captain, are you okay?" he asked, his voice tinged with worry. "We're fine," Blake replied tersely. "But we've got company. Keep the engines warm. We may need to evac sooner than planned." Alex swallowed hard. "Understood." Once the immediate danger passed, the team regrouped in a hidden cave Jacob knew about. It was damp and cramped, but it offered shelter from prying eyes. Lavra sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor, reviewing the data they'd collected so far. Her fingers flew across her tablet as she analyzed schematics of the Kragath's equipment. "These designs," she murmured, her brow furrowed. "They're familiar." Blake knelt beside her. "What do you mean?" She hesitated before answering. "Some of this tech? It looks similar to stuff we've seen before. During past conflicts, remember the raid on Proxima Station? The stolen prototypes?" Blake's blood ran cold. "You think the Kragath stole Earth tech?" "It's possible," Lavar admitted. "If they've been reverse engineering our designs, that would explain how they've managed to overpower so many worlds." Jacob leaned against the cave wall, arms crossed. "So what you're saying is, this isn't just their war, it's ours too." Blake rubbed his temples, the weight of the revelation settling heavily on his shoulders. If the Kragath were using human technology to conquer other species, humanity couldn't afford to sit idly by. This fight wasn't just about helping the Valens anymore. It was about protecting the future of the galaxy and holding themselves accountable for their own mistakes. "We'll deal with that later," Blake said finally. "For now, let's focus on staying alive." Later that evening, the team returned to the bunker to share their findings with the resistance fighters. News of the Kragath's advanced weaponry spread quickly, dampening morale. Many of the Valens feared they stood no chance against such overwhelming odds. But Blake refused to let despair take hold. "We know their strengths," he told the gathered crowd. "Now we find their weaknesses, and we hit them where it hurts." Using Laura's translations and Alex's modifications, the team began equipping the Valens with makeshift tools designed to disrupt the Kragath's energy systems. Small devices, powered by scavenged parts, could overload the alien machinery if used correctly. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As preparations continued, tensions simmered among the humans. Mia voiced her concerns during a private meeting with Blake. "This plan feels shaky," she admitted. "Even with these gadgets, we're still outnumbered. What happens if things go wrong?" Blake met her gaze steadily. "Then we improvise, we adapt. That's what we do best." Ryan Cole chimed in, his tone grim. And if adapting doesn't work? What's plan B? Blake didn't have an answer. Instead, he focused on rallying the crew, reminding them why they were here. We didn't come all this way to give up, he said firmly. If we don't fight, who will? The night before the final assault, Blake found himself alone on the outskirts of the bunker, staring up at the stars. The twin suns had set hours ago, leaving the sky ablaze with constellations unfamiliar yet strangely comforting. He thought about Earth, about the people back home who might never understand what was happening here. Would they remember his name? Or would this mission fade into obscurity, just another footnote in humanity's slow crawl toward the stars? Soft voice interrupted his thoughts. Can't sleep? He turned to see Lavar standing a few feet away, her tablet tucked under one arm. She joined him, gazing up at the heavens. I keep thinking about those symbols, she said after a moment. The ones on the graves? They talked about balance, about respecting the planet's energy. Do you think we've forgotten that lesson? Blake shrugged. Maybe, or maybe we just haven't learned it yet. Lavra smiled faintly. Let's hope we figure it out before it's too late. As they stood there in silence, the enormity of the task ahead pressed down on them both. Tomorrow, they would face an enemy unlike any they'd encountered before. Lives hung in the balance, not just those of the Valens, but of every species threatened by the Kraggoth's greed. Failure wasn't an option, but as Blake looked at Lavara, then at the rest of his crew preparing for battle, he felt a flicker of hope. They weren't perfect, and their chances were slim, but they were determined. And sometimes that was enough. End document. The day of the counterattack arrived with a heavy mist blanketing the forest. The air was thick and damp, muffling sounds and making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Inside the bunker, the atmosphere buzzed with nervous energy. Fighters checked their weapons one last time, adjusted makeshift armor, and whispered prayers or vows to each other. Captain Daniel Blake stood at the center of it all, his face calm but his mind racing. He knew this was the moment everything hinged on, their chance to turn the tide or be crushed under the weight of failure. Jacob Holt moved among the Valens, offering encouragement and final instructions. Remember, he said, his voice low but firm, we're not trying to win this war today. We're just aiming to hurt them enough to slow them down. Hit hard, hit fast, then vanish before they can retaliate. Blake nodded in agreement. Stick to the plan, no heroics. If things go sideways, fall back to the extraction points. We've got ships waiting. Mia Reynolds tightened the straps on her gear, her sharp eyes scanning the room. She caught Blake's gaze and gave him a small nod. Despite her earlier doubts, she looked ready-focused, determined. Ryan Cole, who had stayed aboard the Eclipse to coordinate support, chimed in over the comms. You've got 30 minutes until orbital cover is in position. Make every second count. With that, the Resistance fighters split into groups, each heading toward their assigned targets. Blake led his team toward the central spire where the Kraggoth were extracting core energy. Alongside him were Mia, Laura Hayes, and a dozen Valen. Warriors armed with crude weapons and newly modified disruptors created by Alex Carter. The devices weren't perfect, but they represented hope, a fragile lifeline in an otherwise desperate situation. As they approached the spire, the scale of the Kraggoth operation became clear. Towering machines pulsed with stolen energy, their surfaces glowing faintly as they drained the planet's life force. Alien soldiers patrolled the perimeter, their movements methodical and disciplined. Above them loomed the central structure, itself a jagged monolith surrounded by smaller towers, all connected by glowing conduits. It was both awe-inspiring and horrifying. This is it, Blake muttered, crouching behind a rocky outcrop. Once we start, there's no turning back. Lavara adjusted her glasses, studying the layout through binoculars. Those conduits are our best bet? Disrupt them, and the whole system might overload, Mia smirked. Sounds like fun. Blake divided the team into two groups. One would focus on sabotaging the conduits while the other provided cover. Timing was critical. They needed to strike simultaneously to maximize confusion and minimize casualties. As soon as everyone was in position, Blake gave the signal. The first explosion rocked the area, sending shards of metal and plumes of smoke into the air. The sabotage team, led by Jacob, had struck a conduit near the base of the spire. Alarms blared instantly, and Kragath reinforcements poured out of nearby bunkers. That's when Blake's group sprang into action, firing disruptors and creating chaos. The alien weapons sputtered and died under the onslaught, giving the humans and Valens a brief advantage, but the Kragath adapted quickly. Their leader, a towering brute clad in ornate armor, barked orders in guttural tones. Soldiers regrouped and began advancing, forcing Blake's team to retreat deeper into the complex. Every step felt like walking through quicksand. Progress was agonizingly slow, and danger lurked around every corner. "We need to keep moving," Blake shouted, ducking behind a fallen piece of machinery as enemy fire whizzed past. "Lavara, how much longer?" She tapped furiously at her tablet, sweat dripping from her brow. "Almost there. Just a few more seconds." Suddenly, a deafening roar filled the air. A massive explosion erupted from the far side of the spire, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Jacob's group had succeeded in disabling another conduit, causing part of the structure to collapse. The distraction gave Blake's team the opening they needed to push forward. "Now!" Blake yelled, leading a charge toward the main control hub. Inside, panels blinked erratically as the disrupted energy flow wreaked havoc on the Kragath systems. Lavra rushed to a console, her fingers flying across unfamiliar interfaces. "I'm trying to shut it down completely," she explained. Her voice strained. "If I can overload the core." A shadow fell across the room as the Kragath leader stormed in, his weapon raised. Blake reacted instinctively, tackling Lavra to the ground as a blast tore through the space where she'd been standing moments before. Rolling to his feet, he fired his disruptor, striking the alien square in the chest. The creature staggered but didn't fall, its sheer size and resilience making it nearly unstoppable. Mia appeared at Blake's side, her expression fierce. "Let me handle him." Before Blake could argue, she darted forward, weaving between blasts with incredible agility. Her disruptor clicked empty, so she switched to a combat knife, driving it into a weak spot in the alien's armor. The Kragath roared in pain, swiping at her with claws that narrowly missed tearing her apart. Finally, with a well-placed shot from Blake's rifle, the creature collapsed, its body convulsing briefly before going still. Breathing heavily, Mia turned back to the others. "That was too close." Lavara barely noticed the exchange. Her hands trembled as she worked the controls, sweat dripping onto the glowing interface. "Got it!" she exclaimed suddenly. With a final keystroke, the entire spire shuddered violently. Lights flickered, machines groaned, and the hum of energy extraction faded into silence. "We did it," Blake said, relief washing over him. But there was no time to celebrate. Outside, the battle raged on. Back aboard the Eclipse, Alex Carter monitored the situation anxiously. The ship hovered in orbit, ready to provide support or evacuate the ground team if necessary. When Ryan reported that the spire's energy signature had vanished, he let out a shaky breath. "Think they bought us enough time?" he asked aloud. "They'd better have," Alex replied grimly, "because here comes trouble." On the view screen, dozens of Kragath warships appeared on the horizon, converging on Vela Prime. The aliens weren't about to let their prize slip away without a fight. Down below, Blake's team fought their way back to the rendezvous point, pursued relentlessly by surviving Kragath forces. Casualties mounted on both sides, but the resistance fighters refused to give up. They used every trick Jacob had taught them, ambushing patrols and setting traps to thin the enemy ranks. By the time they reached the extraction zone, exhaustion weighed heavily on everyone, but they weren't done yet. As the last survivors boarded shuttles bound for the Eclipse, Blake glanced back at the burning landscape. The spire was nothing more than a smoking ruin now, its destruction dealing a significant blow to the Kragath's plans. But the cost had been high. Too many lives lost, too much damage inflicted. When the shuttles docked safely inside the starship, Blake gathered his crew on the bridge. "We've slowed them down," he said, his voice steady despite the fatigue etched into his face. But this isn't over, not by a long shot. Ryan pointed to the view screen, where the Kragath fleet continued its advance. They're coming for us next. Mia cracked her knuckles, determination blazing in her eyes. Then let's make sure. They regret it. Alex spoke up, his tone urgent. Captain, I finished retrofitting the ship's weapons using tech from those disruptors. We won't stand toe-to-toe with their fleet, but we can hold our own long enough to escape, Blake nodded. Do it, and prepare for evasive maneuvers. We'll draw them away from the planet, give the Valens a fighting chance to regroup. As the Eclipse powered up its engines, the Kragath opened fire. Bright beams lanced through space, narrowly missing the ship as Mia executed a series of daring twists and turns. The human vessel wasn't built for dogfights, but desperation. Bred ingenuity. Each shot fired from the retrofitted cannons found its mark, disabling several enemy ships and scattering the rest. For hours, the chase stretched on, a deadly ballet of speed and precision. Finally, with the Kragath fleet spread thin and disorganized, Blake ordered a jump to hyperspace. The Eclipse leapt forward, disappearing into the void just as additional Kragath reinforcements arrived. Safe for now, the crew took stock of their losses. Some wouldn't return home, their sacrifices etched forever into the annals of history. Others bore scars, physical and emotional, that would never fully heal. But amidst the sorrow, there was pride. They had stood against overwhelming odds, and struck a blow for freedom, not just for the Valens, but for anyone who dared resist tyranny. As the stars streaked past outside the windows, Blake allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Humanity had taken its first steps toward becoming something greater, a protector, a defender of those unable to defend themselves. It was a role fraught with challenges, but one worth embracing, and somewhere out there, beyond the endless expanse of space, new battles awaited. But for now, they had earned a brief respite, a chance to recover, rebuild, and prepare for whatever came next. End document. The Eclipse emerged from hyperspace far from Vela Prime, its battered hull groaning under the strain of recent combat. The ship wasn't in great shape, scorch marks marred its exterior, and several systems flickered erratically, but it had survived. For now, that was enough. Captain Daniel Blake stood on the bridge, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. His mind replayed the events of the past days, each moment etched into his memory like scars. The crew gathered around him, their faces reflecting a mix of exhaustion and pride. Alex Carter sat at his console, running diagnostics to assess the damage. Mia Reynolds leaned against the wall near the helm, her arms crossed but her eyes sharp, scanning for any sign of trouble. Ryan Cole stood beside her, his usual stoic demeanor softened by the weight of what they'd accomplished and lost. Lavra Hayes sat quietly in a corner, clutching her tablet as if afraid to let go. Her thoughts seemed distant, lost in the vastness of space. We did it, Blake said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was calm but carried an edge of weariness. We hit them where it hurt, we bought the Valens time, but at what cost? Ryan asked, his tone blunt. How many lives are we leaving behind? How long before the Kragath come after us again? Blake didn't have answers, not ones that would satisfy everyone. Instead, he focused on the facts. We slowed them down. That's more than anyone else has managed so far. And we proved something important. Humanity can stand alongside others, even when the odds are stacked against us. Mia nodded slowly. Still feels like we're running away. Running isn't always cowardice, Lavar interjected softly. Sometimes it's strategy. The Valens need time to regroup. If we stayed, we'd only make things worse. She's right, Alex chimed in, glancing up from the screen. Besides, the Eclipse isn't exactly battle-ready anymore. We've got repairs to make and upgrades if we want to survive another fight, Blake agreed. Then that's our next step. We'll head to the nearest human outpost, patch up the ship, and plan our next move, but first, he paused, turning to face his crew directly. We honor those who didn't come back. No one spoke for a moment. The loss hung heavy in the air, a shared grief that couldn't be shaken off easily. Finally, Mia pushed herself upright and walked over to the viewport. They knew the risks, she said quietly, and they still chose to fight. That says something about them and about us. Days passed as the Eclipse limped toward safety. Repairs were slow going. Parts scavenged from damaged systems barely held together, and tempers occasionally flared when progress stalled. Still, the crew worked tirelessly, driven by a sense of purpose that transcended exhaustion. Alex tinkered with the weapons array, determined to refine the disruptor technology they'd adapted from Valen Designs. Ryan coordinated defensive protocols, ensuring the ship could withstand another encounter if needed. Meanwhile, Lavara pored over data collected during the mission, searching for patterns or insights that might help them understand the Kragath better. As they traveled, messages began arriving from High Command, from allies scattered across the galaxy, even from Zinara and the surviving Valens. The alien leader expressed gratitude for their bravery and promised to rebuild, vowing never to surrender to the Kragath. Other transmissions came from species who had heard whispers of humanity's involvement in the conflict. Some praised Earth for stepping up. Others warned of the dangers of entangling themselves in galactic politics. Through it all, Blake listened, carefully weighing every word. Humanity's role in the wider universe was shifting, whether they liked it or not. Once seen as newcomers, cautious observers on the sidelines, they were now being thrust into the spotlight. The question was, what kind of legacy did they want to leave? When the Eclipse finally reached a human-controlled station orbiting a distant moon, the crew wasted no time docking and beginning repairs. Engineers swarmed the ship, replacing damaged components and reinforcing critical systems. Supplies were restocked and fresh recruits joined the ranks, eager to learn from those who had faced the Kragath firsthand. Blake called a meeting in the mess hall to discuss their options moving forward. Around the table sat familiar faces: Maya, Ryan, Lava, Alex, as well as newcomers brought in to bolster their numbers. Among them was Elena Torres, a seasoned medic with a no-nonsense attitude, and Chris Lane, a young engineer whose enthusiasm masked a sharp intellect. "We've made enemies," Blake began, cutting straight to the point. "The Kragath won't forget what happened on Vela Prime. They'll come looking for us eventually. So what do we do?" Chris asked, leaning forward eagerly. "Wait for them to show up?" "No," Blake replied firmly. "We take the fight to them, but not blindly. First, we gather intel, find out where they're weakest, how they operate, why they're so obsessed with energy extraction. Then we strike." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about starting a war," Blake shook his head. "Not a war, a resistance. The Kragath aren't just attacking the Valens, they're targeting dozens of species across multiple systems. If we unite those worlds, we might stand a chance." Lavra nodded thoughtfully. "It's possible. Many of these species already distrust the Kragath. With the right leadership and proof that victory is achievable, they might join forces," Mia smirked. "And who better to lead than us?" Blake ignored the sarcasm, focusing instead on the practicalities. "We start small. Rebuild alliances, share resources, train fighters. Every little bit helps. And while we're doing that, we keep hitting the Kragath wherever they least expect it. Guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run strikes, anything to weaken them." Alex chimed in, holding up a modified disruptor prototype. "With this tech, we've got an edge. It's not perfect, but it works. If we can mass-produce it and distribute it to other species, it levels the playing field," Blake finished. "Exactly." Over the following weeks, the crew set their plan into motion. Diplomatic envoys were dispatched to neighboring systems, carrying messages of solidarity and offers of aid. Resistance cells sprang up on planets ravaged by the Kragath, fueled by stories of humanity's defiance. Slowly but surely, a coalition began to form, a fragile alliance bound by shared suffering and a desire for justice. Meanwhile, the Eclipse became a symbol of hope. Its name spread through the stars, whispered in reverence by those yearning for freedom. Under Blake's command, the ship launched targeted raids against Kragath supply lines, disrupting operations and sowing chaos among their ranks, each successful. Mission boosted morale, proving that even the smallest spark could ignite a flame, but victories came at a cost. Casualties mounted both among humans and their allies. Friendships formed quickly, only to be shattered by loss. Yet through it all, the resolve of the crew remained unshaken. They had chosen this path, knowing full well the sacrifices it demanded. And though the road ahead was uncertain, they pressed on, driven by a belief in something greater than themselves. 1. Evening, as the eclipse drifted silently through open space, Blake found himself alone on the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly before him, cold and indifferent. He thought about Earth, about the billions of people who might never understand the battles being fought in their name. Would history remember them as heroes or fools? A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mind if I join you?" He turned to see Lavra standing in the doorway, her tablet tucked under one arm. She stepped closer, joining him at the viewport. For a while, neither spoke, content to simply watch the cosmos unfold. "You ever wonder if we're doing the right thing?" she asked finally, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "All the time," Blake admitted. "But I don't think there's such a thing as right in situations like this." "Just choices and consequences," Lavra smiled faintly. "I guess that's as good an answer as any." Silence fell between them once more, broken only by the faint hum of the ship's engines. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of light, the Kraggoth continued their relentless march. Worlds burned, lives were lost, and the galaxy teetered on the brink of collapse, but here, aboard the Eclipse, hope endured, fragile, flickering, but alive nonetheless. And as long as it burned, Blake knew they would keep fighting for themselves, for their allies. And for the future they refused to abandon, far away. In the smoldering ruins of Vela Prime, Zanara stood atop a hill overlooking her people's shattered homeland. Bioluminescent markings pulsed softly on her exoskeleton, signaling determination. Behind her, survivors worked tirelessly to rebuild. Their spirits buoyed by tales of humanity's courage. The Kraggoth would return, that much was certain. But when they did, they would find a world ready to resist. United by shared pain and strengthened by newfound allies, the Valens and countless others would rise again, in the vastness of space. Amidst the darkness and despair, a new chapter was beginning. One defined not by conquest or destruction, but by unity and resilience. And at its heart stood a single starship, its crew bound together by a promise to protect those unable to protect themselves, whatever challenges lay ahead. Whatever sacrifices awaited, they would face them together. Because in the end, that was what truly mattered. End document.